Los Aztecas, is a Mexican-American gang originally based in El Paso, Texas. The gang was formed in the jails of El Paso in 1986 and expanded into a transnational criminal organization. They are currently one of the most violent gangs in the United States and are said to have over 3,000 members in the U.S. in locations such as New Mexico, Texas, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, and at least 5,000 members in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. In 2008, Barrio Azteca formed an alliance with La Línea, the armed wing of the Juarez cartel, to fight off the forces of the Sinaloa cartel, who were attempting to take over the drug smuggling routes in the area. The control of the routes in Ciudad Juarez, known as the Juarez Plaza, are vital for the drug trafficking organizations since they are the major illicit conduit into the United States. The DEA estimates that about 70% of the cocaine that enters the United States flows through the area. The gang's main source of income derives from smuggling drugs across the border from Mexico into the United States. They are also responsible for the distribution and sale of narcotics in and outside of prisons. Aside from drug trafficking, they have been charged with a number of different crimes. The gang, which operates in the U.S. and Mexico, has morphed into a prime example of the cross-border nature of Mexico's drug war. Members of the Barrio Azteca gang usually have U.S. citizenship, making them ideal cross-border killers that move back and forth across the U.S.-Mexico border. The Barrio Azteca gang was formed in the jails of El Paso in 1986 and gained an image of being a tough and loyal gang willing to commit murder of civilians in order to keep fear in the minds of its members and ensure their loyalty, obedience. Some believe that the growth of Barrio Azteca in Mexico is due to the area's distinctive cross-border nature. The area of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez is in many ways one community, with families, friends, businesses, and even gangs, joined in the same urban sprawl. Some illegal Mexicans arrested in the United States are imprisoned in Texan prisons and consequently join Barrio Azteca. When they are absolved from their sentences, they are sent back across the border into Mexico, where they quickly join the gang's ranks and carry out a number of crimes. The Barrio Azteca has long sold drugs moved by the Juarez cartel. As Barrio Azteca grew in power, it began to work directly with the Juarez cartel and their alliance grew stronger. The gang began to directly buy large sums of cocaine from the cartel at cheaper rates, and in return the gang would buy weapons in so-called straw purchases from Texan gun shops and then smuggle them across the border. Furthermore, if the cartel needed to intimidate or carry out an assassination in the United States, they would simply call on the Barrio Azteca. When the Sinaloa cartel made its first incursion into Ciudad Juarez in 2008, Barrio Azteca was called to defend the plaza. They are alleged by the Mexican authorities to have committed numerous brutal assassinations in the city, although the exact numbers are unknown. In addition, Barrio Azteca controls most of the drug sales for the Juarez cartel in Ciudad Juarez's streets and prisons, although other gangs and independent operators abound. Barrio Azteca is also reported to have kidnapped people in El Paso and drive them south into Ciudad Juarez to kill them. A murder in Texas drives a huge investigation which often leads to an arrest. But in Ciudad Juarez, it is one of the more than 10 corpses found dead on a daily basis. The gang also tortures and murders its victims in front of a large and cheering gang audience. According to the testimony of an alleged Barrio Azteca member, gang members torture and kill their victims by digging up holes in the ground, throwing a bunch of mesquite, and then pouring in some gasoline. The gang members then beat up their victims and throw them in the hole. Then they light the whole thing on fire. Eduardo Ravello, the current leader of the Barrio Azteca, began his criminal career in the year 2003, amassing a list of charges for racketeering and numerous conspiracy charges with the intent to distribute narcotics. In the year 2005, an informant and former lieutenant of the gang testified that Ravello was looking for a man who had stolen goods from the Juarez cartel. The informant said that Ravelo was taken to a house in El Paso where a gang member was being held, his mouth, wrists, and ankles bound with duct tape. Ravelo then ordered the traitor to be sent to the Juarez cartel, and he was never heard from again. In El Paso, Ravelo's gang is known as Barrio Azteca, a gang originally morphed from the so-called Mexican Mafia prison gang. During its initial years, the gang's aim was street robbery to collect funds to liberate prisoners in jail. Today, the gang has expanded into a large criminal gang with presence in both the United States and Mexico, besetting by drug trafficking and human smuggling. In Ciudad Juarez, however, the gang is known as Los Aztecas. Under the tutelage of Ravelo, the gang moves narcotics along the border with the aid of Vicente Carrillo Fuentes cartel. According to reports of U.S. authorities, Ravelo was born in Mexico but has permanent residence in the United States. He allegedly pays his sicarios, hitmen, less than 500 pesos, or about $40 US, a week to carry out assassinations. 13. When drug loads go missing while being smuggled, suspects are kidnapped and taken to Ciudad Juarez. Some are shot dead, while others are tortured and then shot. Some, however, are beheaded. Not all the killings carried about by Ravelo's gang are a result of drug disputes. Some murders are carried out to intimidate and as retaliation attacks. A fierce battle between rival drug trafficking organizations broke loose inside a prison on the outskirts of Ciudad Juarez on March 5, 2009. The violence resulted in the deaths of 20 inmates. It took the guards, police, and Mexican military more than 3 hours to put down the unrest inside the prison. From a distance, family members awaited news as black smoke drifted from the prison and helicopters patrolled overhead. At one point, inmates could be seen lighting mattresses and bodies being thrown from second-story windows. The brawl, which was between Barrio Azteca and Los Mexicals, erupted at around 6 a.m. after the conclusion of a series of conjugal visits. Alongside Los Mexicals were the Artistas Asesinos, a rival gang and an enforcer group of the Sinaloa cartel. All 20 of the dead were members of Los Mexicals and Artistas Asesinos, indicating that the prison fight was instigated by members of the Barrio Azteca group. One report issued by Los Angeles Times stated that members of Barrio Azteca stole the keys of a prison guard and were able to free their cohorts and begin a rampage in cells controlled by their rival groups. In a relatively low-security area inside the prison, the gang members began to produce knives and force other guards to liberate 150 fellow members. 16. Once they took the guards hostage, Barrio Azteca members went into high-security blocks where the rival members were in, forced the guards to open them, and went about killing the rival inmates. Some of the victims were stabbed with knives, while others were beaten to death. Some were killed with homemade guns. The Mexican authorities were able to militarize the area with more than 200 federal police officers, 50 soldiers, 2 helicopters, a plane, and an unknown number of state and municipal police forces. 16. The exact reasons for the massacre are unknown, but the feud between Barrio Azteca and Artistas Asesinos runs deep, and they often fight for the control of drugs, guns, and other illicit contrabands inside prisons. This massacre had come after a rare experience of 24 hours without any drug-related assassinations in Ciudad Juarez and after a large military buildup during that weekend. 16. Back in 2005, the Barrio Azteca gang had carried out a murderous attack against members of Los Mexicals inside the same prison, leaving 6 dead. At around 9 p.m. on July 26, 2011, the Barrio Azteca carried out an attack on Los Mexicals, a street gang of the Sinaloa cartel, which left 17 dead and 20 injured inside a prison in Ciudad Juarez. Some of the violence was captured by a surveillance video that shows 2 gunmen clearing a hallway of guards before unlocking a door and allowing several triggermen to shoot inside a room where the inmates were killed. The violence continued elsewhere throughout the prison until around 2 a.m. the next day. Although there was no audio in the video, the footage shows how two gunmen order the guards to leave. Despite being armed, they seem to follow the orders of the gang members without any resistance. Following their exit, the two men open a different door and allow four other accomplices into the hallway, some of them who were carrying assault rifles. At that point, the triggerman opened the doors of another room, and that is when the firing began. Officials of the state of Chihuahua said they were unable to locate the 5 weapons used in the massacre. Nonetheless, an AR-15 assault rifle, one of the weapons thought to be used in the massacre, was confiscated. Initial reports had stated that the massacre had started as a clash between prison gangs, but the surveillance video shows cold-blood executions, and that the members of the Barrio Azteca gang carried out the shootout without any provocation from their enemies. According to The Guardian, the video suggests that the guards may have allowed the assassins to kill the inmates, proving that the prison was plagued by weak controls, disorganization and possible corruption. Their reports state that the inmates had broken the rules of the jail and held large parties, possibly with the guards' permission. Moreover, the prison was highly overcrowded, with over 2,700 inmates in a facility with a capacity of only 850 prisoners. Gunmen burst into a party in a small working-class neighborhood known as Villas de Salvador in Ciudad Juarez, killing 16 teenagers on January 31, 2010. Witnesses said that the cartel members arrived at the crime scene in 7 cars with tinted windows, closed down the street and blocked the exits. Then they stormed the party and opened fire at the victims as they were watching a soccer game. Some of the teenagers were shot as they tried to flee and their corpses were found in the neighboring houses. As neighbors hid in their houses, some dialed the emergency services, but the Mexican military and the federal police did not arrive until after the killers had left. When the Mexican authorities arrived, a large crowd gathered at the crime scene as the neighbors and family members of the victims, whose ages ranged from 15 to 20, cried and set down candles. They pleaded for their names not to be released for the fear of the hitmen returning and taking revenge. The relatives and witnesses interviewed after the massacre insisted that the teenagers had nothing to do with the drug trade and were good kids. What was troubling for the authorities was that the victims were not gathered inside a bar or at a rehab center, but rather at a private home. They gave no official statement for the motives behind the killing, but the massacre bore all the signs of the drug violence that Ciudad Juarez was living for the past 3 years. Videos from the crime scene depict a sparsely furnished home with large puddles of blood and taints smeared on the walls. In addition, more than 100 AK-47 bullet casings were found at the crime scene. The Mexican authorities issued a money reward of $1 million pesos for anyone who could provide information that led to the arrest of the killers. One by one, the coffins of the victims were carried out from their homes on February 4, 2012, as their families demanded for justice. The governor of the state of Chihuahua, Jose Reyes Terrazas, showed up at the funeral unexpectedly to pay his respects to the families. Felipe Calderon, Mexico's president, also visited the family members and handed a memorial plaque to the parents of the victims. The mayor of Ciudad Juarez said that the massacre was a random act of violence by Mexico's drug gangs because the victims had no apparent ties with organized crime. But Calderon was widely criticized for his initial comments after the massacre, where he claimed that the investigations had showed that those killed were almost certainly targeted for being involved in organized crime. The parents of the victims hung huge placards outside their houses accusing Calderon of failing to solve the massacre and explicitly saying that until those responsible are found, he was the murderer. The federal government of Mexico responded to the massacre by implementing the Todos Somos Juarez program, which aimed to improve education and social development.